The static crackles, the shadows lengthen, and every single sound in the dead of night could mean the difference between life and death. For San Diego Highway Patrol, the graveyard shift isn't just about traffic stops. It's about navigating an unseen world with its own terrifying rules. We'll show you what it truly takes to survive a night when the city sleeps and the strange awakens. The fluorescent lights of the San Diego Highway Patrol station hummed with an intensity that made Officer Daniel Reeves squint as he clocked in for his first solo graveyard shift. 3 months of training, 2 weeks of riding along with veterans, and now he stood alone in the locker room at 10:47 p.m., adjusting his duty belt with trembling fingers that had nothing to do with the cold. Outside, the October air carried an unusual stillness. San Diego nights were typically alive with distant traffic, the occasional siren, the rhythm of a city that never truly slept. Tonight felt different. The silence pressed against the station windows like something physical, something waiting. Daniel's training officer, a weathered veteran named Officer Patricia Holloway, had retired exactly 1 week ago. Her last words to him echoed in his mind as he checked his equipment. "The night shift changes you, Reeves. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Follow the protocols I taught you. All of them, especially the ones that don't make sense." He had laughed nervously, assuming she meant the standard safety procedures. But Patricia hadn't smiled back. Instead, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his palm and walked away without another word. Daniel still carried that paper in his breast pocket, unopened. Something about the weight of it, the way Patricia's hand had shaken when she handed it over, made him reluctant to read whatever was written inside. The dispatcher's voice crackled through his radio as Daniel climbed into his patrol vehicle. "Unit 47, you're cleared for patrol. Stay sharp out there." "Copy that, dispatch." Unit 47 rolling out. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the asphalt as Daniel pulled onto the empty street. Interstate 8 stretched before him like a dark ribbon, streetlights creating pools of amber illumination that seemed more ominous than comforting. He'd driven this route dozens of times during training, but never alone and never this late. The dashboard clock read 11:23 p.m. when he noticed the first peculiarity. Every vehicle he passed was heading east, away from the coast. Not unusual in itself, but the drivers all shared the same expression. Eyes locked forward, hands gripping steering wheels with white-knuckled intensity, faces pale in the passing headlights. None of them looked at his patrol car, not even a glance. Daniel radioed it in, trying to keep his voice steady. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, observing unusually light westbound traffic on I-8. All eastbound vehicles appear normal, just noting for the record." A pause. Then, "Copy that, 47. It's a slow night. Stay alert." Something in the dispatcher's tone made Daniel's skin prickle. The words were routine, but underneath them ran a current of tension, as if the dispatcher knew something they couldn't say over the open channel. The first call came at 11:47 p.m. "Unit 47, we have a reported stalled vehicle on I-8 westbound, near the Mission Valley exit. Single occupant. No hazards visible. Can you respond?" Unit 47, responding. Daniel activated his lights and accelerated. The stalled vehicle appeared in his headlights within minutes, a silver sedan positioned halfway onto the shoulder. The driver's side door hung open, interior light casting a sickly yellow glow. No one inside. He approached cautiously, hand resting on his sidearm. The vehicle was still running, keys in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat, phone lying face up on the dashboard. The phone screen showed 11:43 p.m., frozen mid-call. No movement anywhere. No footprints leading away from the vehicle. "Dispatch, Unit 47. Vehicle is occupied. Correction, vehicle is running but empty. Personal items present. No sign of the driver. Requesting backup for search." Another pause, longer this time. Unit 47, backup is 20 minutes out. Secure the vehicle and wait for assistance. Do not pursue on foot. Repeat, do not leave your vehicle to search the area. The emphasis on those last words sent ice down Daniel's spine. Standard protocol was to do a quick perimeter check. Why were they telling him to stay in his car? That's when he remembered Patricia's note. With shaking hands, Daniel pulled it from his pocket and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. Daniel, if you're reading this, you made it to your first solo graveyard shift. What I'm about to tell you will sound insane, but every word is true. There are rules for surviving the night shift. Break them, and you won't see morning. Follow them, and you might make it to retirement like I did. Rule 1. Never respond to the same call twice in one night. If dispatch sends you to a location you've already visited, refuse. Make up any excuse, but do not return. Rule 2. If you encounter a vehicle with all doors open and no occupants, do not search for them. Mark the location and leave immediately. Rule 3. Between midnight and 3 a.m., do not make eye contact with anyone standing alone on the side of the highway. They are not what they appear to be. Rule 4. If your radio starts playing music instead of dispatch transmissions, turn it off and do not turn it back on until sunrise. Drive straight to the station and do not stop for anything. Rule 5. If you see emergency flares spelling out words, do not read them. Close your eyes and drive past. There are more rules, but these are the most important. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. The night shift isn't just about traffic enforcement. It's about surviving until dawn. Stay safe, Reeves. The night is watching. Patricia Holloway. Daniel's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the paper. This had to be a joke, some kind of hazing ritual for new solo officers. But Patricia had been the most serious, by-the-book officer he'd ever met. She didn't joke. She didn't do hazing. He looked back at the abandoned vehicle, its doors still hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Rule 2 echoed in his mind. If you encounter a vehicle with all doors open and no occupants, do not search for them. Mark the location and leave immediately. But all doors weren't open, just the driver's side. That meant it was safe to investigate, right? Or was he looking for loopholes and rules that shouldn't exist? Unit 47, what's your status? Daniel keyed his radio, but before he could respond, he saw it. In the tree line beyond the shoulder, about 30 yards from the road, a figure stood motionless among the shadows. Too far away to make out details, but definitely human-shaped. The figure wasn't moving, wasn't calling for help, just standing there in the darkness watching him. His training screamed at him to investigate, to call out and see if this was the missing driver. But Rule 3 whispered in the back of his mind, between midnight and 3 a.m., do not make eye contact with anyone standing alone on the side of the highway. The dashboard clock read 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until midnight. 2 minutes until the rules truly mattered, if they mattered at all. Dispatch, Unit 47. I'm securing the vehicle and returning to patrol. Negative contact with the driver. Copy that, 47. Daniel walked backward to his patrol car, never taking his eyes off the tree line. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted its weight. As he opened his car door, his flashlight swept across the abandoned sedan one last time. Wet footprints led from the driver's side door directly toward the tree line. They hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. The prints were fresh, water still gleaming in his flashlight beam, even though the nearest body of water was miles away. Daniel threw himself into his patrol car and accelerated away, tires squealing on the asphalt. In his rearview mirror, the figure in the tree line remained perfectly still, watching him disappear into the night. As he crossed over to midnight on his dashboard clock, the figure's head turned to follow his vehicle, movement too smooth and too fast to be natural. His radio crackled to life. Unit 47, we're getting multiple reports of abandoned vehicles along your route. How copy? A copy dispatch. How many reports? 17 and counting. All within the last 20 minutes. All with doors open and no occupants. Daniel's blood turned to ice. 17 vehicles. 17 missing people. And he just encountered the first one. Dispatch, requesting immediate backup and instructions. This situation is beyond normal protocols. The response came after a long, tension-filled pause. Unit 47, maintain your patrol route. Do not investigate any abandoned vehicles. Mark locations only. Additional units are being dispatched, but you need to understand something. What's that dispatch? Tonight is different. The rules are in effect. Officer Holloway left you something, didn't she? Daniel's throat went dry. Yes. How did you? Because she left the same thing for every officer before their first solo graveyard shift. Follow those rules exactly, Reeves. Your life depends on it. Every word she wrote is true. We'll explain everything once you survive until dawn. The radio went silent, leaving Daniel alone with the hum of his engine and the endless darkness of the highway ahead. In the distance, he could see another vehicle, lights off, positioned at an odd angle on the shoulder. Another abandoned car, another missing person, and somewhere in the darkness, 17 people stood motionless, waiting for something Daniel couldn't begin to understand. He gripped the steering wheel tighter and drove on, Patricia's rules burning in his pocket like a protective charm against the horrors of the graveyard shift. The night was just beginning, and Daniel was about to learn why some officers never made it to morning. Midnight had transformed San Diego's highways into something unrecognizable. Daniel had patrolled these same roads during training shifts that ended at 11 p.m., familiar with every exit and landmark. But after midnight, the familiar became foreign. Shadows stretched longer, streetlights flickered with arrhythmic patterns, and the white lines marking the lanes seemed to shimmer and bend when viewed through peripheral vision. The dispatch had gone quiet since their last exchange. Daniel's radio emitted only static now, punctuated by occasional bursts of what sounded like whispered conversations in a language he couldn't identify. He'd reached for the volume knob 3 times, but each time, Patricia's words stopped him. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. The abandoned vehicles continued appearing like breadcrumbs, leading him deeper into the night. Daniel marked each location on his GPS, carefully noting the time and position, but never stopping. Rule 2 had become his mantra. At the 19th vehicle, he noticed something that made his stomach clench. Fresh handprints on the outside of the driver's window, as if someone had been trying desperately to get back inside. The prints weren't made by wet hands. They were made by hands dripping with something dark and viscous that reflected his headlights with an oily sheen. Unit 47, be advised. Multiple calls coming in about a figure walking along the westbound lanes of I-8. Callers describe a person in uniform matching highway patrol description. Are you currently out of your vehicle? Daniel checked his rearview mirror reflexively, confirming he was alone in his car. Negative dispatch. I'm in my vehicle, and I've been since the first abandoned car. I haven't exited at any point. Copy that, 47. The figure is approximately 2 miles ahead of your position. Proceed with extreme caution. His headlights caught the figure 3 minutes later. Standing in the middle of the rightmost lane, facing away from him, was indeed someone wearing a highway patrol uniform. The figure stood impossibly still, arms at its sides, head slightly tilted as if listening to something in the distance. Daniel slowed his vehicle, approaching at barely 15 miles per hour. The uniform was old style, the kind worn in the 1970s. He could see that much as his headlights illuminated the figure. The name tag was visible even from a distance. Holloway. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. Patricia had retired a week ago. This couldn't be her. But the uniform, the name tag, even the stance was eerily familiar. Rule 3 screamed in his mind. Between midnight and 3 a.m., Do not make eye contact with anyone standing alone on the side of the highway. They are not what they appear to be. This wasn't the side of the highway. This was the middle of the lane. Did that make it safer? Or was he again trying to find loopholes where none existed? Daniel made his decision. He swerved into the left lane to pass the figure, keeping his eyes locked forward, refusing to look at its face even as he drove parallel to it. Every instinct demanded he investigate, help what might be a fellow officer in distress. But instinct was wrong here. The rules were right. As he passed, the figure's head rotated to track his vehicle. Daniel caught the movement in his peripheral vision, saw the head turn a complete 180 degrees without the body moving at all, neck twisting with mechanical precision that no human spine could achieve. The figure's mouth opened, and a sound emanated from it that made Daniel's windows rattle. Static mixed with screaming, like a radio stuck between stations broadcasting someone's final moments. He pressed the accelerator to the floor, shooting away from the impossible thing, wearing Patricia's name. His radio exploded with the same sound, so loud he had to rip the handset from its cradle and throw it to the passenger seat. The noise continued, growing louder, words beginning to form within the chaos. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Dana didn't look. He kept his eyes forward, speeding down the empty highway until the sound finally faded into normal static. When he dared to glance in his rearview mirror, the figure was gone. The road behind him was empty. His hands shook so badly he had to pull onto the shoulder to collect himself. The dashboard clock read 12:34 a.m. Still hours until dawn. Still so much night left to survive. That's when he noticed the pattern. Every abandoned vehicle he'd marked on his GPS formed a shape when connected. He pulled up the map on his dashboard computer, watching the points link together. The vehicles spelled out two words in a line stretching along the highway. Turn back. Someone, or something, was leaving him a message. 17 people, possibly more, had abandoned their vehicles in specific locations to create a warning visible only from above. Only when all the pieces were assembled. But turn back to where? To the station? Away from something ahead. Before Daniel could process the implications, his radio crackled back to life. But it wasn't dispatch. It was music. Classical piano, scratchy as if playing from an old vinyl record. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece Daniel recognized only because his mother had played it constantly during his childhood. Rule for slammed into his consciousness. If your radio starts playing music instead of dispatch transmissions, turn it off and do not turn it back on until sunrise. Drive straight to the station and do not stop for anything. Daniel reached for the radio power button, but hesitated. The station was 40 minutes away. 40 minutes of driving blind, without communication, without backup. What if something happened? What if he needed help? The music swelled, and beneath it, he heard breathing. Someone was listening on the other end, their respiration slow and deliberate, each exhale lasting impossibly long. Then a voice, distorted but recognizable. Daniel, don't turn it off. We need to talk. It was Patricia's voice, but Patricia had retired. Patricia was safe at home, probably asleep, definitely not broadcasting over a secure police channel at 12:43 a.m. I know you found my note, the voice continued. I know you're following the rules, but there's something I didn't tell you, something I couldn't write down. You need to understand what you're dealing with tonight. Daniel's finger hovered over the power button. Everything in him wanted to listen, to understand what was happening. But the rules have been right about everything so far. The figure in the tree line, the thing wearing Patricia's uniform. The rules existed for a reason. The abandoned vehicles, Daniel. They're not random. Those people made a choice. They saw something they couldn't unsee, and they walked into the darkness voluntarily. But you're different. You're following the rules. That makes you dangerous to them. The voice said them, as if Daniel should know who or what they were. You can still turn back. You can still join us. The night isn't your enemy, Daniel. The morning is. Dawn is when the real horror begins. when you have to face what you become after surviving the shift. Stay in the darkness. Stay with us. It's easier here. Daniel's finger pressed the power button. The radio went silent mid-sentence, cutting off Patricia's voice, or whatever was using her voice, in the middle of a word. Immediate silence flooded the car, so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He put the car in drive and headed toward the station. Rule 4 was explicit. Drive straight back and don't stop for anything. But the route required taking exit ramps, traveling through surface streets for a short distance. The rules didn't account for that. Or maybe they did and he was supposed to figure out on his own. The exit ramp appeared ahead, and Daniel took it, descending from the elevated highway into San Diego's darkened streets. At this hour, even the city's downtown core was largely abandoned. Traffic lights cycled through their patterns for non-existent traffic. Storefronts sat dark and shuttered. The only light came from occasional street lamps, many of which flickered or had burned out completely. Daniel had driven 3 blocks when he saw the emergency flares. They were arranged on the street ahead, red flames burning against the black asphalt in a pattern that was clearly deliberate. Even from a distance, he could see they formed letters. Rule 5 crashed into his awareness. If you see emergency flares spelling out words, do not read them. Close your eyes and drive past. But he'd already seen they were letters. His brain was already trying to assemble them into words. He could feel the pattern trying to form in his mind, like a puzzle demanding to be solved. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut and kept driving, using the white line at the road's edge as a guide, counting in his head to maintain his speed and direction. Something scraped along the side of his vehicle. Metal on metal, a sound like nails on a chalkboard amplified 1,000 times. Whatever was out there, it didn't want him to leave. The scraping continued, moving from the rear of his car toward the driver's side door, getting closer, getting louder. Daniel kept his eyes closed and his foot steady on the accelerator. The scraping reached his window, and he felt the car rock slightly as something pressed against it. He could smell sulfur now, strong enough to burn his nostrils even through the closed windows. Heat radiated through the glass, as if something burning stood inches from his face. A voice whispered directly into his ear, despite the closed windows, despite being alone in the car. Read them. Just open your eyes and read them. It's such a small thing we're asking. Just read the words, Daniel. The temptation was almost overwhelming. What harm could reading do? They were just words formed by emergency flares. But the rules said not to read them, and the rules had kept him alive this far. Daniel pressed his eyes more tightly shut and counted down from 10, praying he'd driven far enough past whatever waited in those flaming letters. At 0, he opened his eyes. The street ahead was clear. His rearview mirror showed nothing but empty road behind him, the flares no longer visible. But his car bore a long scrape down the driver's side. Paint peeled away to reveal bare metal underneath. In the exposed metal, he could see a reflection that didn't match his own face looking back at him from the window. Daniel turned his attention forward and drove faster. The station was 15 minutes away. 15 minutes until he could tell someone what he'd experienced, until he could demand answers about what was really happening on the graveyard shift. But even as he thought it, he knew no one would give him answers. Patricia hadn't received answers on her first night. She'd received rules. That was how it worked. You survived and you learned the rules, and maybe after years of surviving, you understood why the rules existed. The dashboard clock read 1:17 a.m. Still hours until dawn. Still so much darkness left to navigate. Ahead, the station's lights appeared like a lighthouse beacon promising safety. Daniel had never been so relieved to see the parking lot, the familiar building, the normal and mundane sight of a government facility. He pulled into his designated spot and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd made it. He'd followed Rule 4 and survived. But the night wasn't over. His shift didn't end until 6 a.m. That meant going back out there, back onto the highways where things that shouldn't exist waited in the darkness. The station door opened, and Officer Raymond Torres emerged, a veteran of 15 years on the graveyard shift. Raymond approached Daniel's vehicle and tapped on the window. Daniel lowered it cautiously. "You did good, kid," Raymond said, his voice tired but approving. "You followed the rules. Not everyone does on their first night." "What happened to the ones who didn't?" Daniel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Raymond's expression darkened. "They're still out there, standing by the tree lane, wearing our uniforms, using our voices, waiting for someone to make the same mistakes they did." Daniel's blood ran cold. Patricia, the figure I saw wearing her uniform. That wasn't. Patricia Holloway retired 30 years ago, Reeves. She died on her last shift before retirement. Followed every rule perfectly for 3 decades, then broke one on her final night. The thing you saw wearing her uniform, using her name, that's what's left. That's what happens when you break the rules. The world tilted beneath Daniel. 30 years. But he'd trained with Patricia. She'd handed him the rules just last week. She'd been real, solid, alive. Raymond must have seen the confusion on Daniel's face. The night plays tricks, especially on rookies. You'll remember this conversation correctly in morning. Right now, you need to understand something. Your shift isn't over. You've got 4 more hours until dawn. Are you ready to go back out there? Daniel wanted to say no. He wanted to turn in his badge, walk away, find a day shift position in traffic management where the worst thing he'd face was paperwork. But he thought of those 17 people who'd abandoned their vehicles, who'd walked voluntarily into the darkness. He thought of the thing wearing Patricia's uniform, trapped in an eternal night shift, unable to retire, unable to rest. Someone had to keep patrolling. Someone had to follow the rules and maintain some semblance of order in the chaos that emerged after midnight. If officers like Raymond had survived 15 years, then Daniel could survive one night. "I'm ready," Daniel said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Raymond nodded and stepped back from the vehicle. "Good. There's one more thing you need to know about the rules." "What's that?" "They change. Not every night, but sometimes. You'll know when it happens, because everything will go quiet. No static, no sounds, just complete silence. When that happens, you wait. Someone will contact you with the new rules. Until then, the ones Patricia gave you are gospel. Follow them exactly, and you'll see morning." Daniel nodded, put his car in reverse, and pulled out of the parking lot. As he drove back toward the highway, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Raymond stood in the parking lot, watching him leave. But Raymond's reflection in the mirror showed something different. An empty uniform standing upright, as if worn by an invisible person, one sleeve waving in a breeze that didn't exist. Daniel forced his eyes forward and accelerated into the night. 3 hours and 40 minutes until dawn. 3 hours and 40 minutes until he could see the sun rise over San Diego and know he'd survived his first solo graveyard shift. The highway stretched before him, and in the darkness between streetlights, Daniel could see figures standing at intervals along the shoulder. Too many to count, all wearing highway patrol uniforms, all standing perfectly still, all waiting for him to make a mistake, to break a rule, to join their eternal patrol. Daniel's radio remained off. His eyes remained forward. His hands remained steady on the wheel. He had the rules, and the rules would keep him alive. Everything else was just noise, just tricks, just the night trying to claim another officer for its collection. But deep in his chest, Daniel felt a cold certainty growing. Surviving the night was only the first challenge. The real test would be surviving dawn, when he had to reconcile what he'd experienced with the daylight world that would never believe him. When he had to decide whether to return for another graveyard shift, or walk away and let the darkness claim one more officer who couldn't handle the truth. The choice was still ahead. For now, All that mattered was the next mile, the next hour, the next rule to follow. One foot in front of the other, 1 minute closer sunrise, one breath at a time in the suffocating darkness of the San Diego night. The highway felt different when Daniel returned to it. At 1:34 a.m., the stretch of I-8 westbound seemed to pulse with a rhythm he'd never noticed before, as if the asphalt itself breathed beneath his tires. The white lines no longer just guided traffic. They pulled at his vision, drawing his eyes toward the darkness between streetlights where the figures stood sentinel. Daniel had been driving for 8 minutes when he noticed the pattern. The figures weren't randomly positioned anymore. They stood at precise intervals, creating a corridor that funneled him westward, away from the city center, toward the coast where the highway eventually terminated. Each figure turned its head as he passed, tracking his progress with movements too synchronized to be coincidental. His radio remained silent, as required by Rule 4. Without it, Daniel felt isolated in a way he'd never experienced before. The normal safety net of immediate backup, of voices confirming he wasn't alone, had been stripped away. He was truly solo now, navigating by instinct and the rules Patricia had left him. The dashboard clock read 1:52 a.m. when the first new abandoned vehicle appeared. Unlike the previous ones, this car was still running, headlights on, high beams cutting into the darkness ahead. The driver's door was closed this time. As Daniel approached, he could see someone sitting in the driver's seat. He slowed, years of training warring with Patricia's rules. The rules said to mark and move on, but they specifically mentioned open doors and no occupants. This was different. This required investigation. Daniel activated his lights, pulled behind the vehicle, and radioed. Then remembered his radio was off. He was truly alone with this decision. The figure in the car hadn't moved, hadn't acknowledged his presence. Something about the stillness triggered alarm bells in Daniel's mind, but protocol demanded he at least attempt contact. He approached cautiously, flashlight in one hand, other hand resting on his sidearm. The driver was a woman in her 30s, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, eyes wide open and staring straight ahead. She didn't blink as Daniel's flashlight swept across her face. "Ma'am, San Diego Highway Patrol. Are you okay?" No response. Her eyes didn't move. Her chest didn't rise or fall with breath. But she couldn't be dead because her hands gripped the wheel with visible tension, knuckles white with pressure. Dead people didn't grip things. Dead people relaxed. Daniel tapped on the window. "Ma'am, I need you to roll down your window." The woman's mouth opened, not in speech, but mechanically, like a ventriloquist dummy whose jaw had been pulled down by invisible strings. From inside that open mouth came a sound that made Daniel's skin crawl. Children laughing, dozens of them, their voices overlapping and distorting until the laughter became something predatory and raw. Daniel stumbled backward, his flashlight beam wavering. The woman's eyes finally moved, tracking him with a slowness that suggested great effort. When she spoke, her mouth didn't close first. The words simply emerged from that gaping jaw while her eyes pleaded with him. "Rule 6, she said, voice layered with those laughing children. "Never stop for a vehicle where the occupant hasn't moved. They're not waiting for help. They're waiting for company." The woman's hands released the steering wheel and reached for the door handle from inside. Daniel didn't wait to see what would happen next. He sprinted back to his patrol car, drew himself inside, and accelerated away with such force that his tires screamed against the asphalt. In his rearview mirror, he watched the woman's car door open. She climbed out with jerky movements, each motion fighting against invisible resistance. When she stood fully upright, Daniel saw why. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She hung suspended 3 inches above the pavement, supported by nothing, defying physics and sanity in equal measure. She turned toward his retreating vehicle, mouth still hanging open, and raised one arm to point directly at him. The gesture sent a spike of pure terror through Daniel's body. This was different from the other encounters. This felt personal, targeted, as if he'd been specifically selected for something. Daniel drove for 10 minutes straight, not stopping, barely breathing. When he finally allowed himself to slow down, the clock read 2:07 a.m. Still hours until dawn. Still so much night remaining. His patrol brought him to an area he knew well from training. The stretch of highway that curved along the coast, where on clear days you could see the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. At night, the ocean became an absence rather than a presence, a void where even starlight seemed to disappear. The car's headlights suddenly flickered, dimming for just a moment before returning to full brightness. Then they flickered again, and again. Each time the pattern repeated, Daniel caught glimpses of something in the darkness ahead that shouldn't be there. Shapes that appeared only when the light was weakest. On the instant full illumination returned. On the fifth flicker, the shapes resolved into clarity for just a moment. People, dozens of them, standing in perfect rows across all lanes of the highway, forming a human barricade that would be impossible to avoid. Daniel slammed on his brakes, tires skidding, heart hammering. The headlights stabilized, returning to full brightness. The highway ahead was empty. No people, no barricade, just empty asphalt stretching into darkness. But Daniel's headlights now illuminated something else. Emergency flares arranged on the road surface, forming words he'd barely avoided reading earlier. This time the flares were positioned differently, arranged in a shape rather than letters. A circle, a perfect circle large enough to encompass both lanes of the highway, with a single gap facing Daniel's approach. Rule 5 said not to read words formed by flares. It said nothing about shapes. But every instinct Daniel possessed screamed at him to avoid that circle, to find another route, to turn around despite the rules about not returning to previous locations. The gap in the circle called to him. It would be so easy to drive through, to pass between those burning red flares, and continue his patrol. But something about the invitation felt wrong, like a trap baited with the appearance of safety. Daniel stopped his vehicle 30 yards from the circle and tried to think. The rules Patricia had given him were incomplete. She'd said there were more rules, but had only written down the most important. Was there a Rule 6, as the suspended woman had mentioned? Were there Rule 7, 8, 9? How many rules existed in total? And how was he supposed to follow rules he hadn't been told? Movement caught his eye. The figures that lined the highway, the ones in highway patrol uniforms, were moving now. Not walking, but gliding, their feet never quite touching the ground as they converged on his position. They moved slowly, deliberately, forming a semicircle behind his vehicle that would cut off any retreat. Daniel had two choices: drive forward through the circle of flares, or sit trapped between the circle and the approaching figures. Neither option felt survivable. That's when he remembered Raymond's final words. When everything goes quiet, wait. Someone will contact you with new rules. Daniel turned off his engine. The sudden silence was total, absolute, as if the entire world had stopped to observe what would happen next. No engine noise, no wind, no distant traffic. Even the ocean seemed to have ceased its eternal rhythm. The figures stopped moving. The flares continued burning, but their lights seemed to freeze, flames suspended mid-flicker. Time itself felt uncertain, as if this moment existed outside normal causality. Then Daniel heard it, a tap on his passenger window. He turned slowly, dreading what he'd see. A young man stood there, wearing a highway patrol uniform, so old it had to be from the 1960s. His name tag read Morrison. Unlike the other figures, this one smile, and the expression seemed almost human. Daniel rolled down the window an inch. "Officer Reeves," Morrison said, his voice carrying an accent from a bygone era. "You're doing better than most. Following Patricia's rules, staying calm. But you've reached a decision point that requires new information." "What decision?" Daniel's voice came out hoarse. The circle ahead is an exit, not from the highway, but from the game itself. Drive through it, and you'll wake up in your bed at home. This whole night will feel like a nightmare you can't quite remember. You'll never patrol the graveyard shift again. You'll request a transfer to day shifts and live a normal, safe life. The darkness will let you go. Daniel stared at the circle, then back at Morrison. And if I don't drive through? Morrison's smile faded. Then you continue your patrol. You face what's waiting the hours between now and dawn. You learn the rest of the rules the hard way, through survival or failure. Most importantly, you become one of us. Not like them. He gestured to the frozen figures, but part of the real patrol. The ones who protect the boundary between the daylight world and what lurks in the after midnight hours. Those people who abandon their vehicles, Daniel said. Did they take the exit? No, they broke the rules. There's a difference between choosing to leave and being forced out. The circle is a mercy, Officer Reeves. A one-time offer for rookies who've proven they can follow instructions. No shame in taking it. No one will blame you. Daniel's hands trembled on the steering wheel. He thought of his apartment, his bed, the normal life he had just 12 hours ago. The promise of forgetting this nightmare, of returning to a world where the strangest thing about night patrol was drunk drivers and traffic accidents. But he also thought of those 17 abandoned vehicles, their occupants now standing eternal vigil along the highway. He thought of Patricia, who'd supposedly retired, but had actually died following the rules for 30 years. He thought of Raymond, still patrolling after 15 years, and whatever Raymond had become that showed itself in reflections. What happens to the people in the city if nobody patrols? Daniel asked. Morrison's expression shifted to something like respect. The darkness spreads. Slowly at first. A few more disappearances. Unexplained accidents. Eventually, it consumes everything. The graveyard shift isn't just about traffic enforcement, Officer Reeves. It's about holding the line. It's about making sure that when the sun rises, San Diego is still San Diego. Then I'm not taking the exit. Morrison nodded slowly. Then you need the rest of the rules. Listen carefully, because I can only say them once, and you won't be able to write them down. They'll stay in your memory only if you survive the night. Daniel leaned closer to the window, every sense focused on Morrison's words. Rule 6. Never stop for a vehicle where the occupant hasn't moved. They're not waiting for help. They're waiting for company. You learned that one tonight. Rule 7. If you see the same vehicle 3 times in one night, it's following you. Lead it to the ocean and don't look back. Rule 8. Any call that comes through after your radio has been turned off must be ignored. The radio stays off until sunrise. No exceptions. Morrison paused, glancing at the frozen figures around them. Rule 9. If you encounter another patrol officer during the graveyard shift, ask them the date of their last completed shift. If they can't answer, or if the date is more than 1 week ago, they're not really an officer anymore. Maintain distance and do not engage. How many rules are there total? Daniel asked. 13. But you only need to worry about 9 tonight. The last 4 don't apply until you survived your first month of graveyard shifts. If you make it that far, you'll be given those rules by someone who used them to survive. Morrison stepped back from the window. Make your choice now, Reeves. Drive through the circle and forget, or drive around it and remember. Once time starts again, the circle will close. There's no third option. Daniel started his engine. The sound broke the supernatural silence, and immediately the world lurched back into motion. The figures resumed their glide toward his position. The flames in the circle flickered naturally once more. Morrison took several more steps back, his form already fading into the darkness. Daniel put the car in reverse, backed up 50 yards, then swung wide in a U-turn that took him completely around the circle of flares. He never drove through the gap. He never took the exit. The moment he cleared the circle, it collapsed inward, flames extinguishing simultaneously as if someone had blown out a birthday candle. The figures that had been approaching suddenly scattered, disappearing into the shadows between streetlights like roaches exposed to light. Only Morrison remained visible, standing in the side of the highway. He saluted Daniel as the patrol car passed, a gesture of respect from one officer to another across decades of service and sacrifice. Daniel's radio crackled to life, startling him so badly he nearly swore. He'd forgotten it was turned off, but now it broadcast clearly. Unit 47, this is dispatch. How do you copy? This is Unit 47. I copy clearly. Status is, I'm continuing patrol. Copy that. 47. Your radio has been silent for over an hour. We need you to check in every 15 minutes for the remainder of your shift. Can you comply? Daniel glanced at the dashboard clock. 2:41 a.m. Rule 8 echoed in his mind. Any call that comes through after your radio has been turned off must be ignored. The radio stays off until sunrise. No exceptions. This call had come through after he turned off the radio. That made it suspect. What if it had come after he turned the radio back on by starting his engine? Did that make it legitimate? The voice on the radio continued. Unit 47. We have multiple emergency calls in your sector. We need you to respond immediately. First call is a vehicle fire at mile marker 47. Second call is a possible injury accident at the Mission Valley exit. Third call is a... Daniel reached over and shut off the radio mid-sentence. Rule 8 was clear. No exceptions. If dispatch had really needed him, they would have contacted him before his radio went silent, or they would have sent another unit. This was a test or a trap, and he refused to fall for it. The rest of the drive toward the coast passed in tense silence. Daniel maintained his patrol route, marking abandoned vehicles when he encountered them, but never stopping. The pattern of vehicles had changed. Instead of spelling words, they now formed arrows, all pointing toward the water. At 3:15 a.m., Daniel reached the western terminus of his patrol route, where the highway curved along the cliffs above the Pacific Ocean. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the water surface. Under normal circumstances, this would be the most beautiful part of the patrol. Tonight, the moonlit ocean looked like molten mercury, its surface too still, too perfect, too unnatural. A single vehicle sat in the scenic overlook parking area, a silver sedan, identical to the first abandoned car he'd encountered hours ago. The driver's door stood open. This was where his night had truly begun, with an abandoned vehicle and Rule 2. Now he'd come full circle. Daniel approached cautiously, marking the vehicle's position on his GPS, even though his radio remained off. As he got closer, he could see something written on the car's windshield in what looked like condensation from the inside. Thank you. Before he could process what that meant, his headlights illuminated a figure standing at the cliff's edge, looking out over the ocean. Unlike the other figures he'd encountered, this one wore civilian clothes. A woman in her 30s, the same woman who'd been suspended in a motionless vehicle, who'd delivered Rule 6 with a mouth full of children's laughter. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, Daniel could see she looked normal now, frightened, exhausted but human. Her feet touched the ground. Her eyes moved naturally. She raised a hand, not pointing but waving, asking for help. Daniel stayed in his vehicle, mind racing. Rule 6 said never to stop for motionless occupants, but she wasn't in a vehicle anymore. She'd gotten out, moved, proven she was capable of action. Did that make her safe to approach? Please, she called out, her voice carrying on the ocean breeze. I don't know how I got here. I was driving home from work, and then, I can't remember. Everything's confused. I need help. Daniel's training warred with Patricia's rules. This was exactly what he joined the highway patrol to do, help people in distress. But the graveyard shift had taught him that not everything that looked like a person actually was one. He rolled down his window, but remained in his vehicle. Ma'am, I need you to stay where you are. Can you tell me your name? Jennifer. Jennifer Walsh. Please, I'm so scared. There are things in the darkness, things that shouldn't exist. I've been walking for hours trying to find help. Jennifer, when did you leave your vehicle? She hesitated. I don't know. Time feels wrong. Maybe an hour ago. Maybe longer. Daniel checked his GPS logs. The first abandoned vehicle had been at 11:47 p.m. It was now 3:22 a.m. More than 3 hours had passed. If this was the same woman, where had she been in the interim? How had she gotten from the Mission Valley exit to the coastal overlook, a distance of at least 15 miles? Jennifer, I need you to walk toward my patrol car slowly. Keep your hands where I could see them. She took a step forward, then stopped. I can't. Why not? Tears streamed down her face. Because if I step away from the edge, I'll remember. I'll remember what I saw, what I became. As long as I'm standing here, looking at the water, I can pretend I'm still human. But if I turn my back on the ocean, I'll know the truth. Daniel's blood ran cold. What truth? That I broke a rule. That I read the words spelled out in the flares. That I'm not Jennifer Walsh anymore. I'm just something wearing her memories like costume. Please, officer, don't let me step away from the edge. Don't let me remember what I've become. Before Daniel could respond, Jennifer stepped backward off the cliff. No scream, no hesitation, just a calm step into the void. Daniel lunged from his vehicle, running to the cliff's edge. But when he looked down, he saw nothing. No body on the rocks below, no splash in the water, just the moonlit ocean, its surface already returning to that perfect, unnatural stillness. The silver sedan behind him started its engine, though no one had entered it. The headlights flashed 3 times. Then the vehicle rolled forward, slow and purposeful, heading directly for the cliff edge. Daniel scrambled out of its path as it picked up speed, sailed over the precipice, and disappeared into the darkness below. This time there was a splash. The vehicle hit the water and sank immediately, swallowed by the Pacific in seconds. When the ripples faded, the ocean surface returned to its mirror-perfect calm, as if nothing had disturbed it at all. Daniel stood at the cliff's edge, breathing hard, trying to understand what he'd just witnessed. Jennifer Walsh had chosen to end her existence rather than face what she'd become. The vehicle she'd abandoned had followed her into the deep. Was that mercy? Was that justice? Or was it just another aspect of the graveyard shift's unknowable logic? His watch read 3:37 a.m. 2 hours and 23 minutes until sunrise. 2 hours and 23 minutes until he could see whether he'd survived his first night or whether he'd become something else, something like the figures in uniforms that haunted the highway. Daniel returned to his patrol car and continued driving. The rules had kept him alive so far. All he had to do was maintain course, follow the guidelines, and wait for dawn. Simple, straightforward, impossible to screw up if he just stayed focused. But as he drove back toward the city, Daniel noticed his reflection in the rearview mirror was slightly off. The face looking back at him was his own, but the expression was wrong. His reflection wasn't mimicking his movements exactly. When he blinked, his reflection blinked a second later. When he turned his head, his reflection followed after a slight delay. Daniel adjusted the mirror, so he couldn't see his reflection anymore, and kept driving. Some things were better left unexamined. Some questions were better left unanswered. That was perhaps the most important rule of all, the one Patricia had never written down because it couldn't be written. On a graveyard shift, surviving sometimes meant ignoring your own unraveling until sunrise could make you whole again. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, and Daniel drove into it willingly, rules memorized, radio silent, eyes forward, counting down the minutes until dawn while trying not to think about what his reflection was doing in a mirror he could no longer see. The city emerged from the darkness like a beast reluctantly showing its face. Daniel had been driving for 20 minutes since leaving the coastal overlook, following his patrol route back toward the urban center, when he noticed the streetlights were behaving strangely. They illuminated in sequence as he approached, creating a corridor of light that existed only for his vehicle, then darkened the moment he passed. It felt less like driving through a city and more like being guided through a tunnel, directed to a specific destination by an intelligence that wanted him exactly where it planned to put him. The dashboard clock read 3:52 a.m. The witching hour had passed, but something about the time between 3 and 4 a.m. felt heavier than what had come before. The air itself seemed thicker, pressing against the patrol car's windows like something trying to force its way inside. Daniel's radio remained off, as mandated by Rule 8. The silence should have been uncomfortable, but instead, it felt protective, like a shield against whatever wanted to speak to him through that channel. He'd made the right choice shutting it down, even if it meant isolation. Isolation was survivable. Whatever had pretended to be dispatch was not. The patrol route brought him back to I-8, where the abandoned vehicles had first appeared. They were gone now, not driven away, not towed, just absent as if they'd never existed. The GPS still showed his marks where each vehicle had been positioned, spelling out turn back, but the physical evidence had vanished. Daniel added that observation to his growing list of impossible things he'd need to reconcile come sunrise. A new call should have come through dispatch by now. His assigned patrol sector required periodic check-ins at designated locations. Without his radio, Daniel was operating blind, following instinct and memory rather than orders. But Raymond had told him to follow Patricia's rules exactly, and Rule 8 left no room for interpretation. The radio stayed off until sunrise. At 4:03 a.m., Daniel encountered the first sign that the night was entering a new phase. A person stood in the middle of the highway, not at the shoulder where the uniformed figures had maintained their vigil, but directly in his lane, forcing him to slow down or strike them. The person was a young man, maybe 25, wearing pajamas and standing barefoot on the cold asphalt. His eyes were open but unfocused, and he swayed slightly as if buffeted by a wind Daniel couldn't feel. Rule 3 had specified not making eye contact with people standing alone between midnight and 3 a.m. It was now after 3 a.m. Did the rule still apply, or did it expire with the witching hour? Patricia's note hadn't included time limits for the other rules, which suggested they remained active throughout the shift. But Rule 3's specific time frame implied it was only dangerous during that window. Daniel decided to risk it. He stopped his patrol car 15 feet from the man and exited cautiously, flashlight in hand. "Sir, this is Highway Patrol. I need you to move to the shoulder immediately. You're in danger, standing in the traffic lane." The man's eyes focused on Daniel with sudden intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried a desperate urgency that seemed genuine. "They told me to wait here. They said someone would come who could see me. Are you him? Are you the one who can still see?" "Sir, I don't understand what you're talking about. I need to move to safety so we can talk properly." "I can't move. My feet won't obey me anymore. I've been standing here for..." He trailed off, confusion clouding his features. "How long have I been standing here?" Daniel checked his GPS logs, scrolling back through the abandoned vehicle markers he placed throughout the night. None of them had been at this exact location, which meant this man hadn't been here during Daniel's previous patrols. But the man's bare feet showed no signs of having walked on asphalt. No cuts, no dirt, no indication of travel. "What's your name, sir?" "Thomas. Thomas Garrett. I was driving home from the airport. I've been in Phoenix visiting my sister." The clock on my dashboard said 11:34 p.m. And then, I don't know. I was standing here. Did I crash? Is my car nearby? I need to find my car. 11:34 p.m. That was before Daniel had even begun his patrol, before the first abandoned vehicle, before any of this had started. Thomas had been standing in this spot for over 4 hours, unaware of time passing, unable to move his feet. "Thomas, I'm going to help you, but I need you to answer some questions first. Have you seen anyone else tonight? Any other drivers? Any other officers?" Thomas's expression grew haunted. The children. I've seen the children. They walk past every few minutes, heading east, away from the ocean. They don't look at me, but I can hear them singing. The same song, over and over. The night patrol is coming. The night patrol will know. The night patrol will take you where the broken people go. Thomas's voice cracked. What does that mean? Where do the broken people go? Daniel's skin crawled. Children, walking along the highway at 4 a.m., singing about the night patrol. Nothing about that was right. Nothing about any of this was right. Thomas, I haven't seen any children. The highway has been empty except for abandoned vehicles, and Daniel stopped himself before saying figures in patrol uniforms. Some truths would break Thomas's already fragile grip on reality. You haven't seen them because you're still real, Thomas said. You're still connected to the morning. But I've been standing here so long, I've started to slip. I can feel it. Parts of me are becoming untethered, floating away into the dark. Soon I'll be like them, like the children, like all the others who've been standing here longer than I have. Others? Thomas, are there other people standing on this highway that I can't see? Thomas's eyes widened with realization. You can't see them? Oh God, that means I'm further gone than I thought. If I can see them and you can't, then I'm already partway there. I'm becoming invisible to the real world. Before Daniel could respond, Thomas lurched forward, his feet suddenly obeying him again. He grabbed Daniel's arm with shocking strength. Listen to me. The children are a warning. When you can see them, it means you've crossed a threshold. It means you've been in the dark long enough that you're starting to belong to it. How long have you been on patrol tonight? Daniel checked his watch. 5 hours, give or take. 5 hours, Thomas repeated. I've been here for 4.5, and I can see them clearly. You've been patrolling longer, moving through the darkness instead of standing still. That might have protected you, or it might mean you're changing so gradually you don't notice. Tell me, when you look in your rearview mirror, does your reflection do everything you do at the exact same moment? Daniel thought of his reflection's delayed responses, the slight asynchrony he'd noticed before adjusting the mirror. No, he admitted, there's a delay. Thomas released his grip and stepped back. Then you're changing too. The night is getting into you. By dawn, you might be just another figure standing along the highway, wearing a patrol uniform, waiting for the next rookie to drive past. That's what happened to all of them. That's what's happening to you. That's not going to happen, Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. I'm following the rules. I'm staying safe. The rules. Thomas laughed bitterly. You think the rules protect you? They just slow down the inevitable. Every officer who's ever patrolled the graveyard shift has followed the rules. They all still ended up as shadows. The only difference is how long it takes. Some last one night, some last 30 years. But everyone who works after midnight eventually joins the collection. Daniel wanted to argue, to insist that Thomas was wrong, that Patricia had retired successfully, that Raymond was still human after 15 years. But he remembered Raymond's empty uniform reflected in a mirror. He remembered Morrison from the 1960s, still offering guidance decades after his service should have ended. He remembered the thing wearing Patricia's uniform, turning its head 180 degrees. Thomas was right. The rules didn't save you. They just extended your expiration date. If that's true, Daniel said slowly, then why keep following them? Why not just give in? Because every night you survive is another night the darkness doesn't win completely. Every patrol you complete is one more morning for the people who don't know what's really out here. You're not following the rules to save yourself, officer. You're following them to save everyone else. With those words, Thomas stepped back into the center of the lane and closed his eyes. His body went rigid, feet planted, swaying slightly. He'd returned to his vigil, to his slow transformation into something that belonged to the night. Daniel wanted to help him, to force him into the patrol car and drive him to safety. But he knew instinctively that Thomas couldn't be saved. The man had been standing still too long. The darkness had sunk too deep. Any attempt to move him would result in the same outcome as Jennifer Walsh. A choice to end rather than complete the transformation. Daniel returned to his patrol car and drove around Thomas, giving him wide clearance. In his rearview mirror, he watched the young man standing alone on the highway and wondered if Thomas would still be there when the next shift took over, or if he'd have disappeared by then, added to the collection of figures that only the changing could see. The patrol route brought Daniel back through the city's downtown core, where the skyscrapers rose like tombstones marking the burial grounds of daylight ambitions. Every window was dark. Every street was empty. It felt like driving through a model city, a diorama of urban life with all the life removed, leaving only the props behind. At 4:27 a.m., Daniel saw them. The children Thomas had mentioned. They walked in a single file line along the shoulder of the highway, heading east as Thomas had said. 7 of them, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 12, all wearing old-fashioned clothes that might have been in style decades ago. They sang as they walked, their voices carrying clearly despite the closed windows of Daniel's patrol car. The night patrol is coming. The night patrol will know. The night patrol will take you where the broken people go. Daniel's hands clenched the steering wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He could see them. Thomas had said visibility meant he'd crossed a threshold, that he'd been in the darkness long enough to start belonging to it. How much longer did he have before the transformation became irreversible? The children turned their heads in unison as he passed, all 7 pairs of eyes locking onto his vehicle. They stopped singing. They stopped walking. They simply stood and watched him drive away, their expressions empty of emotion, their presence a confirmation of his gradual change. Daniel forced himself to breathe steadily, to maintain his speed, to continue his patrol as if nothing was wrong. Panic would accomplish nothing. Fear would only accelerate whatever process was unfolding. He had to stay calm, stay focused, and above all, keep following the rules. His watch showed 4:41 a.m., 1 hour and 19 minutes until sunrise, 79 minutes until he could end his shift and discover whether he'd survived or merely postponed the inevitable. The patrol route took him past the station, and Daniel felt a powerful urge to pull in, to end his shift early, to seek refuge in the fluorescent lights and normal reality of the building. But Raymond had been clear. The shift ended at 6 a.m., not before. Leaving early might be the final rule violation that completed his transformation. A new figure appeared on the shoulder ahead. Unlike the uniformed figures or the walking children, this one wore contemporary clothes and seemed to be waving urgently for help. As Daniel approached, he recognized the person, Officer Raymond Torres, the veteran who'd briefed him in the parking lot hours ago. Daniel slowed, uncertain. Rule 9 echoed in his mind. If you encounter another patrol officer during the graveyard shift, ask them the date of their last completed shift. If they can't answer, or if the date is more than 1 week ago, they're not really an officer anymore. But Raymond wasn't in uniform now. He wore civilian clothes. Did that mean Rule 9 didn't apply? Daniel stopped and rolled down his window. Raymond, what are you doing out here? Raymond approached the car, and even in the dim light, Daniel could see something was wrong. The veteran officer moved with a stiffness that suggested great pain, and his face was pale, drawn, marked with deep shadows under his eyes. Reeves, thank God. I need your help. My patrol car broke down about a mile back. Radio's dead. I've been walking, trying to find another unit. I need a ride back to the station. What's the date of your last completed shift? Daniel asked, hating himself for the question, but knowing it was necessary. Raymond's expression flickered, confusion passing across his features. My last shift? It was yesterday. No, wait. Last week. Time gets confused out here. You know that. Why does it matter? Because Rule 9 says I need to ask, and you can't answer, which means you're not really Raymond anymore, are you? The thing wearing Raymond's face smiled sadly. Smart kid. Patricia chose well when she picked you to receive the rules. You're right. I'm not Raymond Torres. Not anymore. Haven't been for a long time. But I used to be. I remember what it was like to be human, to worry about mortgage payments and grocery shopping and all the mundane concerns of daylight people. Those memories make this harder. What are you now? A warning. A reminder. A cautionary tale. I followed the rules for 15 years, Reeves. 15 years of perfect adherence. Never breaking protocol. Never violating the guidelines. And it still wasn't enough. The night got into me anyway, piece by piece, shift by shift, until one morning I woke up and realized I wasn't waking up anymore. I was just continuing the patrol in a different form. How do I stop it? How do I avoid ending up like you? The Raymond thing laughed without humor. You can't. That's the secret they don't tell you when you accept the graveyard shift assignment. There's no retirement plan. There's no pension waiting at the end. There's only the patrol, extending forever, until you're not the one doing the patrolling anymore. You're just another piece of the landscape, another marker for the next rookie to navigate around. Then why did you tell me to follow the rules? Why not just let me break them and get it over with? Because the rules determine what kind of thing you become. Break them, and you turn into something twisted, something predatory like the figures that wear uniforms and hunt for rule breakers. Follow them, and you become something else, something that can still help, still guide, still protect the next generation, even after you've stopped being human. Raymond stepped back from the window. 1 hour and 14 minutes until sunrise, Reeves. When the sun comes up, you'll feel normal again. You'll convince yourself tonight was a nightmare, that you imagined the worst parts. You'll tell yourself you can quit anytime, transfer to day shifts, escape before it's too late. But you won't, because now you know what's out here. Now you understand what happens if nobody patrols a graveyard shift, and you won't be able to live with yourself if you walk away. Is that what happened to you? That's what happens to everyone who survives the first night. The really cruel part? It's not the night that transforms you. It's the choice to come back for a second shift, knowing what you know, having seen what you've seen. That's when you truly start changing. The night just finishes where your own sense of duty begins. The Raymond thing turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness between streetlights. Daniel sat motionless, processing the revelation. The trap wasn't the graveyard shift itself. The trap was learning the truth and choosing to continue anyway. Daniel put the car in drive and resumed his patrol. What else could he do? Thomas had been right. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about maintaining the boundary between the ordinary world and the darkness that wanted to consume it. Someone had to patrol the graveyard shift. Someone had to follow the rules and hold the line. If that someone gradually stopped being human in the process, well, that was just the price of the job. The dashboard clock read 5:03 a.m. 57 minutes until sunrise. 57 minutes until he could clock out and pretend to be normal for a few hours before having to decide whether to come back tomorrow night. Deep down, Daniel already knew what his choice would be. The Raymond thing had been right about that too. Once he knew what was out here, walking away became impossible. The guilt would be worse than the transformation. So Daniel drove on through the darkness, following his patrol route, maintaining his vigil, slowly becoming something more than human and less than alive, all in service of keeping the daylight world safe from truths it could never bear to know. The children were singing again in the distance, their voices carrying on the pre-dawn air. The night patrol is coming. The night patrol will know. The night patrol will take you where the broken people go. And for the first time, Daniel understood. The broken people didn't go anywhere. They stayed right here, patrolling forever, becoming the night patrol themselves. It was almost poetic, in a horrible sort of way. The sky began its gradual shift from black to deep purple at 5:31 a.m. Daniel had been watching the eastern horizon with desperate intensity, willing the sun to rise faster, to burn away the accumulated dread of the past 7 hours. But dawn came at its own pace, indifferent to human desperation, and the transformation from night to day felt agonizingly slow. His patrol route had brought him full circle, back to the stretch of highway where he'd encountered the first abandoned vehicle. The silver sedan that had started everything was back, positioned exactly where it had been at 11:47 p.m. The driver's door hung open. No one inside. Daniel drove past without stopping, adding it to the collection of impossibilities he'd need to somehow reconcile with reality. At 5:44 a.m., Daniel's radio crackled to life without him turning it on. Rule 8 said to keep it off until sunrise, but the sun was already beginning its climb above the horizon. Did that count as sunrise? Or did he need to wait for the official clock time of 6:03 a.m.? Unit 47, this is dispatch. Do you copy? The voice sounded normal this time. No underlying static, no children's laughter, no distortions. Just the tired voice of a night dispatcher reaching the end of a long shift. Daniel decided to risk it. This is Unit 47. I copy. Unit 47, we show you've had radio silence for most of your shift. Are you okay? Do you require assistance? I'm fine, dispatch. Just following protocols. A pause, then, understood, 47. You're clear to return to station and clock out. Your shift officially ends at 0600 hours. Welcome to the graveyard shift, Officer Reeves. Something in those last words carried weight, a recognition of what Daniel had endured, an acknowledgement from someone who knew what happened after midnight. The dispatcher wasn't just confirming the end of his shift. They were confirming he'd survived. Daniel pointed his patrol car toward the station, watching the sky lighten incrementally. Colors began returning to the world. The gray of asphalt, the green of roadside vegetation, the blue of early morning sky. It felt like the world was being painted back into existence after spending hours as a black and white photograph. The figures that had lined the highway throughout the night were gone. The children had disappeared. Even Thomas Garrett, who'd been standing in the middle of the lane, had vanished, leaving no trace of his vigil. The graveyard shift was ending, and with it, all the impossible things were retreating back into whatever realm they inhabited during daylight hours. But Daniel could still see his reflection in the rearview mirror, and the delay remained. When he blinked, his reflection blinked a fraction of a second later. When he turned his head, his reflection followed a beat behind. The night had left its mark, and sunrise wasn't washing it away. The station parking lot appeared ahead, and Daniel felt something unclench in his chest. He made it. 7 hours of terror, confusion, and gradual transformation. But he'd completed his patrol. He'd followed the rules. He'd survived. Daniel pulled into his designated spot at 5:57 a.m., 3 minutes before his shift officially ended. He sat in a car, hands still gripping the wheel, unable to quite believe it was over. The station door opened, and 3 officers emerged. Raymond Torres, still looking human in the morning light. No empty uniform reflected anywhere. Beside him, Patricia Holloway, very much alive despite supposedly dying 30 years ago. And a third officer Daniel didn't recognize, an older woman with captain's bars on her uniform. Patricia approached his vehicle first, tapping on the window. Daniel lowered it, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. "You did it," Patricia said, and her smile was genuine. "You followed the rules. You made it through your first night. You were supposed to be dead," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "Morrison told me you died on your last shift 30 years ago. Morrison tells that story to every rookie. It's a useful fiction. Keeps people focused on the rules rather than asking too many questions. The truth is, I did retire just like I said, but the graveyard shift never really leaves you. We all come back eventually, in one form or another, to help guide the next generation." Raymond opened Daniel's car door. "Come on, Reeves. Let's get you inside. You look like hell." Daniel climbed out on shaky legs. Now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion crashed over him in waves. He'd spent 7 hours in a constant state of hypervigilance, and his body was demanding payment for that stress. The captain stepped forward, extending her hand. "Captain Melissa Chun, I oversee the graveyard shift operations. I want to meet you personally, Reeves." Not many rookies make it through their first night following the rules as precisely as you did. "What happens to the ones who don't?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he already knew. "They become part of the landscape," Captain Chin said matter-of-factly. "The figures you saw tonight, wearing our uniforms, every one of them was an officer who broke a rule. They're not gone exactly. They're just serving in a different capacity, still maintaining the patrol, still holding the line, just not in a form we'd recognize as human anymore." They walked into the station together, and the fluorescent lights that had seemed harsh and artificial 12 hours ago now felt warm and welcoming. The building was full of officers, day shift personnel arriving, night shift personnel preparing to leave, normal people doing normal jobs, unaware of what happened on the highways after midnight. Patricia guided Daniel to a small conference room and closed the door behind them. Raymond and Captain Shin joined them, and suddenly Daniel was sitting across from 3 people who knew exactly what he'd experienced. "I have questions," Daniel said. "A lot of questions. Everyone does after their first night." Captain Shin replied, "Ask. We'll answer what we can." "Thomas Garrett, the man standing in the highway. Is he still out there?" Raymond shook his head. "By now, no. Once the sun comes up, people like Thomas fade completely. They had their chance to be rescued during the night. If no one saves them before dawn, they become permanent fixtures. Thomas will be standing in that spot every night from now on, visible only to officers who are far enough along in their own transformation." "And the children? The ones singing?" Patricia's expression darkened. "Those are older, much older. They've been walking that route since before any of us joined the force. We don't know who they were originally. We just know they're a warning sign. If you can see them clearly, you're changing faster than normal." "How clearly did you see them, Daniel?" "Very clearly. Every detail. Their clothes, their faces, their mouths moving as they sang." The 3 officers exchanged glances. Captain Shin spoke carefully. "That's concerning. Most rookies only catch glimpses on their first night. Full visibility usually doesn't happen until the 3rd or 4th shift. You might be more sensitive to the transformation than average." "What does that mean for me?" "It means you'll need to be extra careful about following the rules. It means you'll have less time before the change becomes permanent. Most officers have years, maybe decades if they're lucky. You might have months." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Months? That's all. Maybe less," Raymond said quietly. "I'm sorry, kid. Some people are just more susceptible to the night. It's not your fault. It's just bad luck. Can I stop it? Can I quit, transfer today's shifts, never come back?" "You could," Patricia said, "but you won't. None of us did. Once you've seen what's out there, once you understand what happens if the graveyard shift goes unpatrolled, walking away becomes impossible. The guilt would destroy you faster than the transformation." Daniel wanted to argue, to insist he was different, that he'd quit right now and never look back. But Patricia was right. He'd already decided to return before Thomas had even explained what was at stake. The moment he'd chosen to drive around the circle of flares instead of through it, he'd committed to this path. "What about Jennifer Walsh, the woman who stepped off the cliff?" Captain Shin pulled out a tablet and scrolled through reports. Jennifer Walsh was reported missing 3 months ago. Last seen driving home from work on I-8. We found her vehicle abandoned with the door open. The case went cold. She'd been standing in that car, frozen, visible only to officers on the graveyard shift, for 97 days before you encountered her. When you approached, she was given a choice: complete the transformation or end it. She chose to end it. She chose death over becoming, whatever those things are. She chose peace over an eternity of standing watch. Not everyone makes the same choice. Some people prefer existence in any form to non-existence. Others would rather cease entirely than become something other than human. Neither choice is wrong. Daniel rubbed his face, trying to process everything. The 17 abandoned vehicles that spelled out turn back. Who were those people? Officers, Raymond said. All of them. They were trying to warn you, to give you a chance to escape before you got in too deep. They'd all reached a point where they couldn't maintain human form anymore, but they had enough residual awareness to try helping the next rookie. It didn't work, obviously. You came anyway, because I didn't know what the warning meant. No one ever does until it's too late. Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. Daniel, I need to ask you something important. When you look in a mirror right now, what do you see? Daniel thought about his reflection's delay, the asynchrony that had developed throughout the night. My reflection is off. It doesn't move when I move. There's a delay. How long of a delay? A second, maybe two. All three officers reacted, their expressions grim. Captain Shin closed her eyes briefly, as if receiving bad news she'd expected but hoped to avoid. That's further along than it should be after one night, Patricia said gently. Daniel, I won't lie to you. You're changing faster than anyone I've ever seen. At this rate, you might have weeks, not months. Maybe only days. The room spun. Daniel gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. Days? You're telling me I might have days left of being human. Of being fully human, yes. But that doesn't mean it's over. It means you're transitioning into whatever comes next. And what comes next depends on the choices you made during these remaining shifts. What are my choices? Captain Shin stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where the morning sun now shone brightly. Choice 1. Quit immediately. Transfer day shifts or leave the force entirely. You'll maintain your humanity longer that way, maybe even indefinitely if you avoid the highways at night. But you'll know what's out there, and you'll know no one else is patrolling. The guilt will be corrosive. Choice 2, Daniel asked. Continue working the graveyard shift. Follow the rules meticulously. Accept that you're transforming, but try to control what you become. Officers who follow the rules become guides, like Patricia and Raymond and me. We're not fully human anymore, but we're not predatory either. We help. We protect. We maintain the boundary. And choice 3. Raymond answered this time. Stop following the rules. Let the transformation take you quickly and completely. Become one of the figures that hunts for rule breakers. It's faster, less painful in some ways, but you lose everything that made you yourself. You become just another predator in the dark. Daniel looked at each of them in turn. You're all still here. Patricia retired but came back. Raymond is 15 years in. Captain Shun is running the whole operation. You all chose option 2. We did, Patricia confirmed. Because someone has to. Because the alternative is letting the darkness consume everything. We're not heroes, Daniel. We're just people who couldn't walk away when we learned the truth. How long do any of you have left? How long until you're completely transformed? Captain Shin smiled sadly. I crossed that line 7 years ago. I'm not human anymore. Not in any technical sense. I just maintain enough of the appearance to function during daylight hours. By midnight, I'm something else entirely. Patricia and Raymond are close to that point too. Maybe another year or 2 before they cross over fully. And then what? Then we become permanent fixtures. We join Morrison and the others, guiding rookies through their first nights, passing along the rules, maintaining the system. It's not death exactly. It's transformation into something that serves a purpose beyond individual survival. Daniel stood on shaky legs and walked to the window, standing beside Captain Shun. Outside, the city was waking up, people heading to work, starting their days, completely oblivious to what had transpired on the highways just hours ago. They lived in the daylight world, safe because people like Daniel and Patricia and Raymond were willing to patrol the darkness. I'm coming back tomorrow night, Daniel said quietly. I choose option 2. Are you sure? Patricia asked. You don't have to decide right now. Take some time. Think about it. I'm sure. You were right about the guilt. I already know I can't walk away. Might as well accept it now rather than pretending I have a choice. Captain Chen put a hand on his shoulder. Then we'll train you properly. The rules Patricia gave you are just the beginning. There are techniques for slowing the transformation, ways to maintain your sense of self even as your body changes. You won't be alone in this, Daniel. We take care of our own. Raymond joined him at the window. For what it's worth, you did better than most tonight. Following the rules exactly, trusting your instincts, staying calm under pressure. Those are the qualities that determine what kind of guide you'll become. You'll be a good one. How can you know that? Because you're still asking questions. The ones who become predators stop caring about the answers. They just want the transformation to finish so the pain stops. You're still fighting to understand, to maintain control. That's the difference between becoming something helpful and becoming something dangerous. Daniel checked his watch. 6:07 a.m. His shift had officially ended 4 minutes ago, but he felt like he'd lived several lifetimes in the past 7 hours. Every minute after midnight had stretched into eternities, each encounter aging him in ways that had nothing to do with time. What do I do now? He asked. Now you go home, Patricia said. Sleep if you can, though most people can after their first night. Eat something, even if you're not hungry. Try to maintain normal routines. When you come back tomorrow evening, we'll give you the advanced rules and start teaching you the techniques for managing the transformation. Tomorrow night, Daniel repeated. Less than 24 hours until he had to face the darkness again. It felt simultaneously too soon and too far away. One more thing, Captain Shin said as Daniel headed for the door. Your reflection will continue to lag further behind. Eventually, it will start moving independently, doing things you're not doing. When that happens, don't panic. It's just the separated part of you, the human consciousness that's being displaced by what's replacing it. Treat it kindly. It's still you, just in a form that can't stay connected anymore. Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The implications of having his reflection become a separate entity were too overwhelming to process in his current exhausted state. He walked to his car, every movement feeling distant and dreamlike. The parking lot was full now. Day shift officers starting their patrols, completely ordinary people doing completely ordinary jobs. Daniel envied them their ignorance. 24 hours ago, he'd been one of them. Now, he was something else, something in between, something becoming. The drive home took 15 minutes. Daniel lived in a small apartment in North Park, a neighborhood that looked perfectly normal in the morning light. Children walking to school, people walking dogs, joggers getting their exercise in before the day heated up. The mundane beauty of it all nearly broke him. These people would never know how close the darkness came every night. They'd never understand the price paid for their continued safety. Daniel parked and climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment. His reflection in the hallway mirror confirmed what he'd known. The delay had lengthened. Now his reflection moved a full 3 seconds behind his actual movements. Soon it would be 4 seconds, then 5, and eventually it would move independently. A ghost of who he'd been before the graveyard shift claimed him. Inside his apartment, everything was exactly as he'd left it 12 hours ago. Dishes in the sink, laptop open on a coffee table. His bed, unmade but inviting. The familiar space felt alien now, as if he was looking at someone else's life, someone who no longer existed. Daniel collapsed on his bed fully clothed, too tired to even remove his uniform. Sleep should have been immediate, but his mind kept replaying the night's events. The abandoned vehicles, the thing wearing Patricia's uniform, Thomas Garrett standing frozen in the highway, Jennifer Walsh stepping calmly off a cliff, the children singing their haunting song. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You did well tonight. Remember, the rules aren't about survival. They're about choosing what kind of thing you'll become. Choose wisely. Morrison. How Morrison had gotten his number, Daniel didn't know. But the message's meaning was clear. The transformation was inevitable. The only variable was what he transformed into. Daniel closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, he lay there in the morning sunlight, feeling the separation between his body and his consciousness growing wider, feeling the night's influence still clinging to him despite the brightness outside his window. By tomorrow evening, he'd have to face it all again. The darkness, the figures, the rules, the gradual erosion of his humanity in service of protecting people who would never know his sacrifice. It should have terrified him. Maybe it did, somewhere beneath the exhaustion. But stronger than fear was something else. Purpose, understanding, acceptance of a role that needed to be filled regardless of the personal cost. Daniel finally drifted into an uneasy sleep around 10 a.m., his dreams filled with highways that stretched into infinity, with children singing songs that explained everything, with reflections that waved goodbye as they walked away to live separate lives. When he woke at 4 p.m., disoriented and aching, the first thing Daniel did was check his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The delay had increased to 5 seconds. His reflection smiled at him, but Daniel hadn't smiled. It was beginning. The separation, the transformation. Daniel showered, ate mechanically, and began preparing for his second graveyard shift. He pulled out Patricia's note and read through the rules again, committing every word to memory. He'd need them tonight, and every night after, for however long he had left. At 8 p.m., Daniel's phone rang. It was Captain Shun. "Reeves, before you come in tonight, I need to tell you something. We've been monitoring the highways. The activity level is higher than usual. Whatever's out there, it's agitated. Possibly because you survived your first night so successfully. They don't like it when rookies follow the rules perfectly. It upsets their collection patterns. What does that mean for tonight? It means they'll test you harder. They'll try to make you break rules. Stay sharp. Stay focused. And remember, no matter what you see, no matter what they show you, the rules are absolute. Break them, and you're lost." "Understood. One more thing. When you come in tonight, look for me before you start your patrol. I have something for you. Something all successful rookies receive after their first night." Daniel agreed and ended the call. He had 2 hours before his shift started. 2 hours to mentally prepare for whatever the darkness would throw at him tonight. He spent those hours reviewing everything he'd learned, mentally rehearsing the rules, preparing himself for the psychological warfare that the graveyard shift represented. When 10 p.m. arrived, Daniel was as ready as he could be. The drive to the station felt different this time. He wasn't approaching his first shift with naive confidence anymore. He was returning with full knowledge of what waited in the darkness. That made him either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Possibly both. Captain Shin met him in the parking lot, holding a small wooden box. This belonged to the first officer who successfully completed a full career on the graveyard shift. It's passed down to each generation of officers who prove themselves capable of following the rules. "Open it." Inside was a simple compass, but instead of pointing north, the needle spun slowly in a counterclockwise circle. "It doesn't point to magnetic north," Captain Shin explained. "It points to whatever is most dangerous at any given moment. Use it when you're uncertain. Use it when you need to know which direction to avoid. It won't make the shift easy, but it will help you survive." Daniel took the compass, feeling its weight, its significance. This was more than a tool. It was a symbol of belonging to a brotherhood that existed outside normal reality. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've survived a full month. That's when you'll truly understand what you've committed to." Daniel clocked in at 10:43 p.m., climbed into his patrol car, and drove toward the highway. The sun had set an hour ago. The city's transformation from day to night was nearly complete. Soon it would be midnight, and the rules would become absolute again. As Daniel merged onto I-8, he glanced at his rearview mirror. His reflection waved at him, a gesture of farewell and encouragement. It knew what was coming. So did Daniel. The dashboard clock read 10:58 p.m. 2 minutes until 11 p.m. 2 minutes until the graveyard shift truly began. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, checked the spinning compass on his passenger seat, and drove forward into the gathering darkness. Somewhere ahead, the children were beginning their nightly walk. The figures in patrol uniforms were taking their positions along the shoulder. Thomas Garrett was returning to his vigil in the center lane, and Daniel Reeves, no longer entirely human but not yet completely transformed, drove to meet them all, following the rules, maintaining the patrol, holding the line between the daylight world and the darkness that wanted to consume it, because someone had to, because the alternative was unthinkable, because once he knew the truth, walking away ceased to be an option. The night stretched ahead, vast and hungry and full of tests he'd have to pass. But Daniel was ready. He had the rules. He had the compass. He had the knowledge passed down through generations of officers who'd made the same choice. He had everything he needed except time. And time was the one resource the graveyard shift consumed most efficiently. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, all that mattered was the next mile, the next hour, the next rule to follow in his gradual descent from human officer to something else. Something that would continue patrolling long after Daniel Reeves ceased to exist in any recognizable form. The static crackled. The shadows lengthened. Every sound in the dead of night carried weight and warning. And Daniel drove on, counting down the minutes until midnight, when the rules would become absolute and the real shift would begin. Again,